This is the Fatty Joe Show, coming to you from Casa de Carey, deep in the forests of Nutmeggerville. This show is dedicated to exploring pathways to better health from a holistic perspective. In each episode, we will explore such topics as nutrition, mental and emotional health, fitness, and more. I'm Yogi, your host, and I became interested in studying health after conventional health dogma became damaging and led me to become massively overweight. Against modern convention, I went on a keto lifestyle and I lost over 300 pounds and gained a level of control on my personal health that I never had before. Now I'm on a journey to find out what is myth and what is truth in the ever convoluted world of what is considered healthy. Come join me on a journey of discovery as I look for a path to improve total health. If you'd like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/thefattyjoeshow or patreon.com/carrybrown. If you want to check out all of our social media links and recipes, head to carrybrown.com. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, and subscribe to the show.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Fatty Joe Show, coming to you from the Nutmegger Forest in Casa de Careyland. And we have our first returning guest. If you missed it, Michael Rutherford was the very first guest on our podcast, and we have him back. So make sure you go back and check out, and you can see what kind of guy Michael is. But Michael is a nutritional therapy practitioner, a primal health coach, and a classically trained chef. Today, Michael has come back because we're going to tackle a couple of topics, and they are very closely related. We're going to explore how they're related, but we're going to mainly talk about digestion, and we're going to talk about how digestion affects mental health. Michael has dealt with his own digestive issues and kind of specializes in helping others resolve digestive issues in themselves to greater have access to the nutrients that they take in their body and deal with discomfort and things like that come sometimes very severely so. And you would know that too if you when you go back and you listen to Alberto's podcast where he talks about ulcerative colitis and the problems of his digestive system. So let's get on into it. Michael, welcome back to the show. And how things been going with you?
Man, I think it's cool. I'm the first repeat. I don't mind that at all. Hopefully you've already had some amazing guests. It was so cool to see some of the first guests that you had launching this podcast, and it was an incredible honor to even be considered amongst those. So that felt great. Now to be the repeat, I'm excited, and especially to talk about this topic. I mean, let's just dive right into my story, I guess, so we can, everyone can kind of know why this is such a big deal for me. Is I dealt with IBS for basically about 20 years symptomatically. It's one of those things, do you ever truly, reverse it, or is it just remission? Whatever that may be. I have no doubt that if I were to go back to standard American way of eating, those problems would come right back, right? As far as, I don't ever plan to do that. So we might as well consider it reversed, but, for the true medical terms, we'll call it remission. But yeah, I mean, really, since I was 6, 7, 8 years old, I remember severe digestive problems. I mean, really, it's kind of depressing to think about, but I remember being like 7 or 8 years old in the bathroom, just like in pain and tears, like crying for like the pink juice, right? The Pepto Bismol.
Mm.
And not that I would suggest it now, but that's just what we thought, right? So I was like, God, just begging for it because I was in such pain at such a young age, and it never got better. And I tried fiber cereals and fiber supplements and soy milk instead of real milk, and just left and right and all the different standard things. And really, by the time I was in my 20s, I just kind of thought that was just my body. It was just going to be this way, and I just kind of lived with it. But it was miserable. I mean, I was afraid to go out backpacking, or I loved being outdoors, but I was afraid to go backpacking or hiking or to go on a boat fishing. Um, if I didn't have access to a bathroom, for example, IBS, really, there's two main categories. You have IBS D, which is diarrhea, and IBS C, which is constipation. I primarily was IBS D. You do have people who alternate. But I needed to be around the bathroom. The worst of that was about a few months before I actually found all of this and made changes. It was a 35-minute drive to work, and I stopped four times in a 35-minute drive. Like, that's not, you can't live that way. I worked in restaurants. I could go to work. I shouldn't have, but I could go to work with, with a huge fever and get through it. But I was to the point where I'd have to not go to work because I wasn't productive. I was in and out of the bathroom. Like, you can't live that way. Not being able to enjoy going outdoors. Anywhere you are, you're like, where's the nearest bathroom, right? Like, always in the know. And it ruled my life. And it was one of those invisible diseases, right? Like, I didn't physically, from the outside, I didn't look much different than I do now. I wasn't overweight. I didn't have type 2 diabetes. I didn't have high blood pressure. I didn't have cholesterol problems. Like, there was none of these traditional things that fit into, oh, well, you're sick and we can tell, right? It was, and if you would have asked me, I would have told you, oh, yeah, I'm healthy, right? Because I didn't have those problems, but I was miserable. I didn't feel good. And it was a more or less everyday thing. Lo and behold, I was over at my father's for dinner back in sort of been spring of 2015. So 5.5 years ago now. And he had just started reading some of these books that many of your listeners and we're well aware of now, books like Eat the Yolks by Liz Wolfe and Grain Brain and Grain Maker and just Mark Sisson's Primal Blueprint and Dave Asprey's books. So all these different books that were out at the time, some of the Keto Clarity, and realized that everything we've been told about nutrition was just flipped upside down, right? And it all just made sense. Like, it's just logical sense that we should eat food that comes from the earth, whether that's grown or it's raised. Like, things that have only been present for thousands and thousands and thousands of years alongside human evolution. Like, that just makes sense. And I was just like, well, let's just try it, right? For just the sake, I grew up in sports and athletes as an athlete, and so I was always had an interest in nutrition and being healthy. So I was like, I'll just try this, just as it makes sense. I wasn't for any of the issues that I was dealing with. I was on 1,500 milligrams of ibuprofen a day, which is above the daily recommendation. I'd been doing that for a decade for knee pain from working in restaurants and being an athlete. I was I was a newborn or a new dad with newborn twins who were just a few months old, plus working two jobs and 6, 7 days a week. So I was exhausted on caffeine. Within 6 weeks, I had no digestive problems of going like a paleo keto-ish diet. I had no digestive problems for weeks now, which was literally I'd never experienced since I was a child, since I could remember. I wasn't needing ibuprofen, and my caffeine intake was like cut in half. I just wasn't needing it in the afternoon. And I was like, okay, there is something here. Like, I did not expect any of this. I wasn't even tracking it for a while. I just stopped one day. I was like, wait a minute, I don't need any of these things. So that was my big aha moment, was the summer of 2015. And it was just at that point I was in, man. I learned when I get interested in something, I'm all in. Like, give me all the information. I had over 50 books within the first year. I went through the Primal Health Coach Institute. When I finished that and paid that off, I went through the NTA program for nutritional therapy. I've done every year. I've done continuing education on all sorts of different programs. I've created my own programs. When we talk about digestion, I've created an entire program for Destination Health when I was working with them the past couple of years on digestion. And it's a great middle ground because it's simple enough for the everyday person who just wants to help kind of figure out their own problems and fix it to go through, but it's also enough information that a lot of practitioners have also gone through that program to help their clients who want to specialize in digestive issues. I think it's anyone who's familiar with Jimmy Moore's books and Cholesterol Clarity and Keto Clarity, he's done that, right? Like, it's a great book for anyone to learn. It's simple enough, but also in depth enough and actionable enough. And that was kind of my goal with those programs. Now, again, I continue to mentor other practitioners on how to work with clients, especially in digestion. This is something that's just so incredibly close to me. Um, yeah, man, but there's a ton to it.
Yeah, and people often ignore their digestive issues. They don't think it's a big deal. Like it's not normal for somebody to be constantly constipated or diarrhea or something, even if you're not diagnosed with IBS. And it's often a sign that something else is going wrong with you. And we know that now, as we're learning, we know that our digestive health and our gut has so much more to uh, it is so much more than just digesting food and getting nutrients. It affects so many systems in our body. And let's let's talk a little bit about things that people might need, if they're seeing this in their daily routine of it, what might be issues that signal that they need to address this.
Wow. Yeah. So, one of the things that we have to understand is more than I want to say it's around 70%. 70% of adults have some sort of digestive issue. Like that's mind blowing. But at the same time, it's not because we know most Americans are eating the standard American diet, and it's not fit for human consumption. Like it's not compatible with human life. It's really not. I mean, just look, our generation is now aiming to be the first generation to start lowering the expected lifespan. Like that's all of the technology, all the advancements in medicine that we have, and we still can't extend. And those last 10 to 15 years are miserable. Like that's not life, right? Being hooked up to machines on 6 different medications, like that's not life. You're not being able to do anything. You're just living in a bed. Like we might have like why at that point, right? It's really for all your loved ones. It's not for you because you're miserable. It's your loved ones who aren't ready to let go at that point. So it's crazy, but and those are direct symptoms like gas and bloating and acid reflux and GERD and diarrhea and constipation. Those are the direct symptoms of digestion. What we have to realize is even in celiac disease. So celiac disease is kind of the one that most people know about with the gluten allergy that is a direct autoimmune response and it destroys the intestines. 30%, and again that's destruction of the intestines due to the autoimmune response. Something around only 30% of celiacs actually have digestive symptoms, and we're talking about destruction of the intestines, and yet a large amount of them don't even have digestive symptoms, and a lot of them are going undiagnosed because of that. It shows up again, this is kind of, we won't get into it too deep just yet, but it connects directly. A lot of them have depression, anxiety, bipolar. They have these different neurological issues because and we're now understanding this is the amount of connection. There's a literal connection and access between the gut and the brain. A lot of what happens in the brain is coming from the gut, and vice versa. It's really interesting when we look at traumatic brain injuries. Within 6 hours of a TBI, you can have gut permeability or leaky gut as a direct result. So we can see how connected those two. I mean, we call it our second, it's really being called the second brain now, right? So they're
Mm.
so connected, and it goes both ways. So it's interesting. If you have skin issues, you have psoriasis, eczema, any of those are almost always starting in the gut. Any autoimmune condition, any autoimmune condition. So really, it's interesting. For the most part, what determines the autoimmune condition you get is your genetics. So if you had Hashimoto's and I had ulcerative colitis, one of the biggest differences is that you are more genetically predisposed and at risk for Hashimoto's, and I'm more predisposed for what did I say, ulcerative colitis or whatever it was.
Mhm.
Um, and but the triggers that made that happen are primarily the same, and one of those is gut permeability or leaky gut. That's what really starts the whole autoimmune response. Is these bacteria and proteins, amino acids getting through the gut into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. And again, we're not talking about like sepsis. So this isn't like your actual like feces getting into your system, but we're talking at an incredibly microscopic level. We're talking about like the bacteria and the proteins and amino acids getting through that shouldn't be, and they circulate, and your immune system does what it's supposed to. It mounts an attack to a foreign substance. This shouldn't be there. The problem is what we know as mimicry is that those compounds that your body attacked also look very similar to other areas of your body. For example, the gliadin protein, what is responsible for gluten sensitivity in celiac disease, looks a lot like a component of your thyroid. So one of the biggest triggers for Hashimoto's is gluten. The other issue is that gluten and the casein molecule, which is a protein found in dairy, can also mimic each other. They look very similar. So now we have gluten and dairy, which are both huge triggers for Hashimoto's disease, and really for almost any autoimmune disease. Those two are really big ones. So, we may not have digestive symptoms. We can have this different autoimmune disease, right? You've got Hashimoto's thyroiditis, you've got these thyroid symptoms, or you have eczema and you've got these skin problems. And yet they're often coming back to the gut. We have autoimmune conditions. We know we need to work on the gut. A lot of neurological symptoms, depression, anxiety, bipolar. I mean, we've seen even bipolar coming back, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. There's some really incredible studies. There was a study done with like 40 some patients with fibromyalgia, and every single one of them ended up testing positive for dysbiosis, an imbalance of microbiota, the gut biome, the probiotics, the bacteria in our intestines. That's huge. 100% of them in that study of about, it was small, it was only about 40 people, but there are multiple studies on fibromyalgia looking at the gut. It's a pain issue. People aren't thinking they may not even have gut symptoms. But again, we see that, it's amazing. And it makes sense when we start looking at it. The cells of the microbiome are 10 to 1 to human cells, which is incredible because they only make up about 3 or 4 pounds of our body weight. But they're so tiny, right? They're so small that they still outnumber our human cells 10 to 1. Like that's mind-blowing to think about. Like we are more microbiota, fungus and parasites and yeasts and bacteria and viruses than we are human.
I've been seeing reports where they talk about serotonin receptors, and they used to believe that serotonin only came from the brain, but now they're finding a lot of your serotonin actually comes from your gut.
The majority of it is made in the gut.
Yeah. And they're actually finding that some of the serotonin is actually produced by the microbiota.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is incredible. The microbiome controls insulin sensitivity, not entirely, but influences, I should say, insulin sensitivity, weight, blood pressure, like your mood, the production of nutrients. It produces certain nutrients, especially B vitamins. It can produce neurotransmitters. A lot of our neurotransmitters are made in the gut. Serotonin's a big one. Serotonin, in fact, a lot of people will take 5-HTP, which is a precursor to serotonin, for gut motility. People who have motility issues will take 5-HTP to help produce serotonin to help move things along. So people who are constipated, people who have, the word just skipped my mind, but it is a lack of motility. So their digestive system isn't contracting. The muscles in the digestive system aren't contracting the way they're supposed to move your chyme, which is the substance that actually makes up the content in your digestive system, along. And so we can use these things to help improve the transit and stimulate that. And serotonin is one of those compounds that's why it's in the gut, is it's helping to create motility and move things along. And it's primarily being made there, and then also can help improve neurological issues. We also have inflammation. So this is where, again, the TBI, the traumatic brain injury, has its influence. So we have a toxin called LPS. It's a lipopolysaccharide. So this is a compound that is partially responsible for leaky gut, for gut permeability. It's also, we used to think that the blood-brain barrier is just like this solid fortress wall that doesn't break down. Now we realize we can have leaky brain. And a lot of people with leaky gut have leaky brain, and it is because of LPS. And this can be in the gut. This can stem from the gut. LPS can be a result of the breakdown of the endothelial within the vascular system or the blood-brain barrier. So it is essentially involved in the breakdown of any endothelial layers that could be within the gut, in the vascular system, within the brain. This is why people with hypertension can be stemming from gut issues. But how many doctors are have patients coming in with hypertension asking how their gut is, right? None.
Well,
And maybe a functional medicine doctor, and that's about it.
yeah. Well, on the same time, you touched on genetics a little while ago, and people may be predisposed to certain illnesses and ailments, but like let's say, Carrie deals with MTHFR, but that gene, that mutation of that gene that can cause problems, if your nutrition and your digestion is working properly, may not express.
Yeah.
So you may not get the problems and express that tendency that if your digestion's working properly.
And more important, and I think, I love how Dr. Ben Lynch really talks about this. He has a whole book. It's called Dirty Genes, and that's exactly it. So what people have to realize is just because you don't have the mutation doesn't mean your genes are working properly. So you could have dirty genes, whether you have the mutation or not. You could have, the quote unquote no issues genetically in your NTHFR series, which is there's actually about 26 genes related to that. The core NTHFR is what, gets all of the attention, but there's several within that. The whole function of methylation and that whole cycle and what's involved. But you could not have mutations and have a poor lifestyle. Your sleep sucks. You don't move. You don't exercise. Your diet sucks, right? Your digestion's a wreck. And guess what? Your NTHFR gene isn't going to work properly, right? Or you could have the mutation, you get good sleep. You do move your body. You eat according to what works for you. You do have good digestion. And you don't need to worry about that gene because it is working properly. Everything else is working properly and helping to support that. So we have to step away exactly. Like you can be predisposed. The vast majority of health issues are not genetic. They're not like it can have a component, but just because you have a genetic predisposition towards Hashimoto's disease, if you never that's only 1 out of 5 components to have it actually come to life, right? So if you take care of the other 4, you've probably got like a 0.5% chance of actually getting the problem.
Yeah, to touch on what you were just saying is they believed cancer was primarily a genetic disorder up until recently when they actually did that massive gene study. And now they're finding cancer is more closely related to environmental toxins
Right.
and the nutrition that you eat rather than. So it's you may have the gene that can express in certain cancers, but
It's
that
very
gene may
much the
not be
same.
activated.
Yeah, it's very much the same as what we talked about autoimmune disease. Really, your genetics are going to decide what cancer you get, where that's going to show up, versus if you're going to get cancer. It only plays about a 3 to 7% role in your risk across the board for cancer is involved with genetics. That includes breast cancer and the freaking BRCA gene. It hurts. Like it hurts women. It hurts me that women have been so like fear mongered into the BRCA gene. Like, oh, if you have BRCA, like you're gonna get breast cancer, and they go out and get surgery as a preventative measure just in case.
Yeah.
Like it's mind blowing. We actually like when you look at it, that's not the case at all. It's still a small portion. If we give the environment the right environment to our body, those risks go down drastically.
Now, the goal of your diet, of getting these high nutrient dense foods in your body, the right macros, things like that, that is so that you have the right fuel and components to make systems work properly in your body, to, that you have proper hormone with the T1, T2 from the thyroid, the you have the right nutrition for testosterone and estrogen function and but if your digestion isn't working properly, let's say you're not breaking down the materials, you're going to be more prone to a lot of these issues, including emotional, psychological issues.
Yeah, so it's I'm a big fan of analogies, and again, I created that digestive course primarily targeted at truck drivers to help learn these issues. So I was trying to come up with a means of explaining this whole process to drivers, and so this will probably strike home, really easy for you to understand. We look at this as the whole deliverance of goods, right? So your digestive system is the distribution center, right? So let's just say it's a Walmart distribution center, right? That's your digestive system. Well, there's inputs, right? So you have your brain function, because your brain is what's controlling the signals between your body and the different organs to communicate with each other, and when your stomach acid should be secreted and when bile should be secreted and pancreatic enzymes. That's all coming back and forth between your digestive system and the brain. So your brain has inputs, and then you're obviously eating food, right? Like there is the food input. There's got to be something to digest. Those are we've got the goods coming in, and then also those pancreatic and stomach acid and bile and all the juices and enzymes coming in. So we have three major inputs into the digestive system. These can be seen as all the goods coming in to the distribution center. Now we have a problem. If this is a Walmart distribution center and a Target truck shows up, well, that's not going to work, right? That's not where it should be. That's kind of like eating the wrong food, or being, your brain isn't communicating properly. Maybe the goods just don't show up. So that could be your brain not communicating properly, or the enzymes not being secreted. That's going to be a problem too. We need the goods to show up so we can distribute them. And then the distribution center should receive those goods, properly unload the trucks, and get them into either new trucks to go out to individual centers or wherever it may be. That's the rest. So the receiving of those goods and the distribution of them, that's your digestive system, right? And then it's going to go to all the different areas. This truck's going to go to New York. This one's going to go to Kansas. This one's going to go to Florida, wherever. This is going to go to a local store. That's your vascular system, your cells, your hormones, your brain, right? All the different systems of your body that need nutrients. So each and every step is incredibly important. Any wrong step is going to create problems down the road, right? It might start with the wrong food, but that's going to create problems in the breakdown and in the distribution. So it's only going to further. We could look at it as, diet and nutrition as creating a building, right? If we want to build the Empire State Building, are we going to build it out of 2x4s or like steel beams? Like, what do we want the main structure? Do we want the steel beams? We're not building one of the tallest buildings in the world off of 2x4s. It's not happening, right? But that's how most of us are trying to live. That's how we're trying to keep our body whole, right? Is off of the standard American diet, which is essentially the 2x4s, instead of good whole materials. But same thing, if you could have the best materials in the world, the best diet, it could be perfect. But if your contractors, your workers who are trying to build the building suck and they're not good at their job, and they're grade C contractors trying to build one of the most largest buildings in the world, that's not going to work either. It doesn't matter what material you give them. That's your digestive system, right? So we can see these different analogies, and that's sometimes we need to be able to see things that way in order to be like, oh yeah, like our body is certain parts of your body are either being replaced every 3 days, every month, every year, every 5 years, and every single function in your body, every cell that's built, replaced, the billions of functions that happen and reactions that happen in your body come from something. Right? The very basis of science is that you cannot create something out of nothing. So everything has to come from something. That something we have three major inputs into our body: what we breathe, what we drink, and what we eat. Right? Those are essentially the three major inputs into our body. The biggest one being what we eat. That is where most of our nutrition is coming from. So if we're not bringing in good materials or enough materials, whether that's macronutrients or micronutrients, we can't facilitate properly a lot of the processes that are happening in our body. And we have to be able to not only receive them, but break them down and use them properly.
Yeah. Well, I've made it known that my main reason for going into keto, as well as it's Carrie's main reason, as well as brain health. And your brain thrives on things like omega 3s and saturated fats, and even omega 6s to a point for to help the cellular structure of the walls. But oftentimes, especially if you've been on a low fat diet, you guys have talked about this quite a bit. If you've been on a low fat diet for a long time, your body may be out of practice of actually digesting these fats in order to get the brain benefits and brain function benefits of consuming these raw materials that your brain needs to function. And I know that I learned a lot from you guys and was able to help fix my digestion, but you guys are the ones that taught me how to do that. So I want to talk, let's talk a little bit about getting the benefits of proper fat digestion for brain health, for emotional health, function, everything.
Yeah, so fat digestion is a massive problem in the US because we've been told to eat low fat. And it's one of those things. If you don't use it, you'll lose it kind of deal, right? And so often we need to bring that function back. And we can bring that function back, but it can take some time and some work in a lot of people. And part of that, so your liver produces a substance called bile. If you've ever vomited and it's like green and yellow, that's some bile. Uh, that's what that is. And that comes from that greenish color comes from the bilirubin, which is kind of the pigment, which actually helps to control the color of your stools. There's a lot we can tell by the color of stools with fat digestion. So if you have more whitish pale stools, for example, that's just a complete absence of bile, which is a problem. If you have more like green, enjoy the TMI aspect for some people, but if you've got some more green colored stools, that's too quick of a transit. So the bilirubin, the bacteria in your large intestine should actually take the bilirubin and change it to what's called stercobilin, which actually gives the brown pigment. So if the transit time through the colon is too quick, the bacteria don't have time to make that change and that breakdown and metabolize the bilirubin into stercobilin. And so you don't have that brown pigment. So if it's greener, that means you have too quick of transit time. So there's some different things that we can start to learn about both our fat digestion or the lack of bile or transit time from the color of our stool could be really helpful. If you've got if you after you have a bowel movement, you've got like this like sleek shine on the top, like an oil slick on the top of the water. There could be two things. You're just eating too much fat. Like you can consume too much fat that your body just isn't going to absorb and break down. So it could be that. But if you're not just like guzzling, butter and olive oil, oils and things like that, and you're kind of being moderate about it, then we need to start looking at your body's ability to digest and absorb fats. That can definitely be a big sign. If your stools are always floating, again, that can be a combination of you just might be eating too much fat for your body and it's just not absorbing it all because it just doesn't need to, or its inability to digest and absorb that. So those are some big symptoms. If you're getting pain, this is my right side. So your liver and gallbladder are over here, just under the liver starts up in the rib cage, kind of right up here, and comes all the way down in your gallbladder is this little like 3 to 4 inch little bladder that sits right around there. So if you're getting these pinching pains over there, that after especially a higher fat meal, that can be a big sign that we have some issues in there. So your liver produces the bile, which is the main substance that helps emulsify fats. So emulsification is like if you just have oil and vinegar, like they don't mix, right? You need something like an egg yolk to emulsify those together. Well, our digestive system is primarily water based. Well, fat and water, oil and water don't mix, right? So we need those to be able to emulsify. So we use things like phospholipids, like phosphatidylcholine, along with bile salts, all contained within the bile substance to help emulsify those fats. So then the pancreatic enzymes, such as lipases, can actually help break those fully down so that your body is able to absorb those in the small intestine. So we have to have this whole process. Not only does the liver need to be healthy, so it's making healthy bile, but then the gallbladder needs to be working properly. That's where the excess bile is stored. And when fat enters into your small intestine, the gallbladder and liver should be signaled to secrete that. Now, what happens is if you're eating a low fat diet, that never really gets signaled. So what happens is that bile just sits in there, kind of builds up. And the longer it sits in your gallbladder, the more it concentrates and it gets thicker and sludgier. Just like if you were to leave, if you had a car that sat in the garage for 10 years, like those fluids are going to get sludgy. They're not going to work well, right? Like the engine isn't going to work great. And so you got to do some work in there. You got to help support that, get those flowing. So we have to, we could do things. Dark leafy greens can be helpful. Bitter foods can be helpful. There's tons of teas that can help be gentle and supporting. Beets, both the greens and the roots, are fantastic for liver and gallbladder support. There's tons of supplements that we could get into that help support that. And oftentimes we may have to ease into the fat because our body can't break that down. So we can help support that, get that flowing. And I find a lot of people who struggle, they went keto and they're struggling, they're not feeling the energy, right? Even their electrolytes are good and they're still not feeling the energy. They've tried all the other things and it's their fat digestion. And again, they may not have like obvious digestive symptoms. They may be minor or minimal, but they may have an issue with both digesting fats and then metabolizing fats. So ketone production, for example, primarily happens in the liver. It's where most of our ketones are produced in the liver. Again, the liver is also what makes the bile to digest the fats. So if we have liver problems, then and congestion and lack of function there, not only could we struggle with digesting the fats, but even if we do digest them, we may still be struggling with metabolizing the fats. So this is where we have this kind of all-out approach of supporting the overall function of the liver. And people, when they do that, I've had a lot of people thrive once, like, oh, this is what I needed. I mean, there's so many people, and not to say that everyone needs to be keto or that it's going to be perfect for everyone, but I have found when we start getting into these nuanced areas, like if you have poor fat digestion, whether you're keto or not, we need to improve that. If you have trouble metabolizing fats, whether you're keto or not, we need to improve that. Keto just may have brought it to your awareness because you're eating a lot of fats, and so the digestive systems became aware. Or fat is supposed to be your primary energy source, and you're having problems using that for energy. Your body's going to be struggling for energy, right? You didn't give it a lot of carbs. It's not able to metabolize the fats very well, so you're not going to feel well. When we start addressing these, I haven't found very many people who can't thrive on a ketogenic diet. They may not necessarily need it, but I have worked from everyone from, a 20-year-old to a 80-year-old female, and same for men across the board with thyroid issues, adrenal issues, diabetes, digestion issues. And it's not that I put every client on a ketogenic diet. Sometimes they come to me because they want to be on a ketogenic diet for whatever reason, it is. And I help them get to a point where it works for them. And there really hasn't been a client that's come to me with that request where we haven't been able to get them to that point.
Now, another aspect of the fat digestion and digestion as well, and a kind of a signal that you may not be breaking down the food properly, is heartburn, right?
Yeah, so heartburn is one of those things. There could be so many causes, but the poor fat digestion can definitely be a big one. It's one of those things I kind of alluded to earlier. It's a big component of a lot of Americans and a lot of problems with Americans. And if we don't digest fats properly, it's going to set up inflammation and dysbiosis in the small intestine and large intestine because now we haven't created the right environment. So especially if you're eating a higher fat diet and you don't digest those well, you're setting yourself up for a lot of problems. It could be heartburn, it could be SIBO, it could be, intestinal, just inflammation and leaky gut or other imbalances that can really feed into if we're not digesting those fats. It can really be a major component of a lot of digestive issues.
Yeah, and I found that was one of my issues. And using your tips, I used things like apple cider vinegar tonics to help me get that acid level up to where it needed to be in order to break down the fats that were coming through. And I also used beets, like you suggested as well. These were two of the tactics that I used to get myself back into a better digestive function. One of the things you just touched on it lately, we wanted to tie in how your gut health and things working in your gut affect your brain health. But you had just mentioned SIBO, and there's SIBO and YIBO, or no, SIBO and CO, right? Yeah, I always get
So
the acronyms messed up.
there's a lot. So really,
Yeah.
with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, this is one of those terms that has kind of been used as a catch-all, and it
Mhm.
really shouldn't. That is a very specific overgrowth or infection that happens within the small intestine from certain bacteria. And there's two different forms. There's one, I think it's is it methane and hexane. I think are the two different gases that it can produce. I believe. So there's very specific testing for a SIBO overgrowth, and that's specific. But oftentimes people will use this for as a catch-all for any dysbiosis, which is an
Yeah.
imbalance of bacteria. Is really not accurate. So yes, there's SIBO, then there's FIBO, which is fungal intestinal.
Mhm.
So you could have a fungal overgrowth, you could have a yeast overgrowth. There's lots of different overgrowths we could have within the small intestine. We can also have a lot of imbalances and overgrowths within the large intestine as well. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, it is, and they are again. It's one of those things to be proactive. Don't wait until there's symptoms. I've seen a
Yeah.
lot of people who don't have obvious digestive symptoms have these issues.
Yeah, one of the things that you guys have talked about quite a bit is the fact that, talking about that bacteria and brain health and how a lot of your behaviors and brain functions and things can be controlled. But some of these bacterial overgrowths or these fungal overgrowths or yeast overgrowths, these are things that thrive on sugar, and they can trigger brain chemicals and actually drive very hardcore sweet tooths in
Yeah.
people. And you don't think you're being controlled by these little micro things, but they're telling you, I want sugar, go get that Cinnabon. And you're really having these little riders in your system control what you do, like a little puppet master.
Yeah, and I'm really going to speak directly to women for just a second here. This is a population that has really been abused within our medical system and just not understood very well. The amount of women who are likely on birth control and or antidepressants because they have gut issues is scary. Because traditional medicine doesn't know how to look at these issues. We don't have good testing for this, and so they run their blood labs. They're like, oh, everything is a okay. They use horrible ranges. They're looking for disease states. They're not looking for a lot of these things when they look at labs. And so they're like, oh, it's all in your head. Here, you've got some issues. Here's birth control because that'll fix every single problem a woman has. Apparently, it's horrendous. That's a whole nother conversation. Um, it, and then again, oh, you're moody and this and that, and that's why you're having your cravings, whatever. We'll give you an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety med, and lo and behold, the whole time it's candida. For example, candida especially is a type of yeast that can really really drive sugar cravings like to the extreme. um, you're really not at fault for like it is hard to ignore those cravings. Now, what's interesting about candida though is a ketogenic diet also is not recommended. Yes, it does feed on sugar, but candida will also feed on ketones. So it's one of these things that you kind of want to be in this no man's land. You want to ideally you're probably looking at like the 60 to 100 gram range of carbohydrates if you have candida. That's kind of the sweet spot for a candida diet, because you don't want to have too many ketones because that can actually also fuel the yeast. It's one of the trickier infections to get rid of for sure, and I think it's because it's so opportunistic on what it can feed on. You want to be mindful about that. Everyone hears about, oh, it's sugar and carbs and everything that feed it, and so they go super low carb and they can't fix it because again they're still feeding it with the ketones.
Now we're finding to in this day and age that one the diagnoses of mental illnesses and mental disorders is on the rise in our country as well as worldwide. And we are also finding evidence, as you've talked about before, that so many of these issues are related to gut health. You may be genetically prone to have these things, but they may not express if you're digesting food properly, if your gut's functioning properly, if you don't have leaky gut, if the bacteria is in the right spot. Um, we are seeing, especially in low income areas, these issues of mental health on the rise, of behavioral disorders, control issues, emotional control, things like that. And we also see a certain diet that's associated in these low income areas of food. And we're talking about the lowest form of the standard American diet, the most
Yeah.
processed foods, the most things. So tell us a little bit about how this type of food affects the gut health and in turn affects the brain health.
Oh man, I mean, it affects both horrendously. I mean, one we look at, and this may even either surprise or upset some people. Sugar high is actually not a thing. There is no scientific literature that really truly supports a sugar high. We always talk about, oh, kid, you just gave the kid a bunch of, but let's think about the things that really cause that. Candy, cakes, these different sweets, all of those actually has artificial dyes. This is why things like ADD and ADHD are becoming so incredibly common. We have kids who are 2 years old. 18% of children on ADHD meds are between the ages of 2 and 8. 18%. 2-year-olds on
Mm.
pharmaceutical medications. Right? Are you kidding? Your 2-year-old is hyperactive? What?
And then
No,
you're
he's
just not
two.
giving a 2-year-old speed.
Yeah. It's like, it's mind blowing. But again, we look at this so it's the dye, it is the artificial dyes. And those have been linked. So the blue color 40 or the yellow, yellow 5, all these different food colorings that are artificial that are used here in the US that aren't allowed in most European countries. And guess what they don't have? They have almost ADHD and anxiety are almost unheard of in Europe.
And these
Nothing like
countries
what it
do
is
eat a
here.
lot of high amount of carbs, a high
Yeah.
amount of
It,
sugar, a high
it,
amount of wheat,
and,
grains.
and no one gives their kid an apple and be like, oh man, they went on a sugar high, right?
Hmm.
But they eat the same amount of sugar in a candy and they're bouncing off the walls. Why? It's the dyes. It's not the sugar. We have lots of research showing that these artificial dyes are neurotoxic and neuroexcitatory. We don't see that from sugar, not in that same way. Now, it can light up some addictive tendencies, but not to the point of this neuroexcitatory thing. So one, I mean, it is scary to see what kids are. We just went through Halloween,
Mm.
um, just last week, just this last weekend at the time of this recording. And I mean, just look at the ingredients in candy and look at it compared the same exact candy or food and go look at the European label and they don't have artificial dyes. These companies know this, but Americans let it get away with it.
Well, even on the candies, because one of the the nutritional lullabies that's supposed to lull you into a sense of safety and security is all natural. They'll tell you
Yeah.
it's all natural. It must be safe. It came from the ground. But one of the dyes that's commonly used as an all natural ingredient and is horrible for gut health is annatto, which is in cheeses, it's in candies, it's in, if you get that real, orange block of cheddar cheese or American cheese, that's oftentimes annatto, which can lead to IBS type syndrome, Crohn's type symptoms, and is linked to a number of other type issues. So even when the ingredients say all natural, there are a lot of things you should keep your eyes out for, which are going to affect that gut health, the gut permeability, and in turn your brain health.
Yeah, I mean, alcohol's all natural, and look what it does to the body. Cocaine's all natural. Like,
Mhm.
natural does not mean safe by any means. Um, so yeah, it is definitely something we have to be mindful of and start paying attention to what that really is and what it can do. And again, it is and not eating like you could probably use an auto seed and it would be totally fine. But when you concentrate and you use these extracts to get these certain things, and now you're getting 100 times what you would normally eat from getting just eating the substance itself. We're talking about a totally different ballgame here. The poison's in the dose, right? So it could be
Mhm.
we use concentrations, and now we're talking about something totally different. So yeah, it is. And again, we see this in these really low populations, and I get this question a lot, from other practitioners. That just came up the other day as to, what are some good budget friendly things. This is where I think we really fall back on like the whole staple of rice and beans can be really helpful for these people, right? So you can get dried beans on WIC. I mean,
Mhm.
it is one of the cheapest foods you can get. And probably outside of the paleo template, beans are the best food you could get out of, if you were to look at like the grains and legumes and things like that, beans are
It's
going to be your
lesser
best
than
bet.
evil.
Yeah,
Yes.
beans and lentils, especially if you get them dry. You actually, I don't even think you can get canned beans on Wick. I think it is only the dried beans, which is actually
Mhm.
ideal. We want to get the dry beans, soak them overnight with a little. You've got like a tablespoon or two of apple cider vinegar, and then enough 3 times the volume of water. So if you have like a half a cup of beans that you're soaking, you want to use 1.5 cups of water. You do like a tablespoon or two of apple cider vinegar. You let that sit on your counter overnight, and then in the morning you rinse those really well and then cook them until they're really nice and soft. And that's going to get rid of a lot of the problematic compounds, the anti-nutrients, the phytic acid, and things like that that are associated with that. Now you have this more bioavailable food that has the nutrients are more bioavailable. It's less irritating to the digestive system. Um, and I mean, they're pretty good. They've got great minerals, great B vitamins. Their fiber to total carbohydrate ratio is fantastic. So
Mhm.
this can be a really good food. And dried beans are dirt cheap.
Yeah.
They can stretch a long way, and they're filling.
Ted Naiman, he tells a story about how he had a homeless patient who would come in, and the homeless patient bought himself a little stove because the homeless patient. This is a weird time in history where we have massively overweight homeless people who are poor,
Mm, it's
and
depressing. It's
they're
scary.
and these people are often eating in calorie deficient uh, foods because they're often going for periods of time where they're not able to eat, but yet they're still getting obese. And that tells you what certain types of calories can do to the metabolic system and hormone function. But this man, before seeing Ted Naiman, was eating cup of noodles, ramen, was eating these types of highly processed foods because they were cheap.
Yeah.
And he went, the homeless man went and bought a inexpensive camp stove to cook his food, went and bought the ground chuck that was one of the cheapest forms of meat he can buy, and the lost leader eggs, and ended up getting all of his metabolic markers in correct. His digestion improved. The digestion issues he was having of constipation due to the highly processed starches and grains and things disappeared, and he dropped something like 70 pounds. And these are not expensive foods, high in
No.
protein, and eggs, as we know, have a very nutrient dense micronutrient ratio. Even the lost leader eggs are still better than a lot of the other food out there.
Yeah.
If ideally we obviously want pasture raised,
But even the
but
cheapest eggs are going to be far better than a box of
yeah,
mac and cheese or ramen noodles or anything else.
right. So along those lines, the whole real food concept, which is something whether you're keto, vegetarian, vegan, most of these groups agree on that aspect, whole real foods.
Yep. Yeah,
So
100%. And again, you could look at, if you really needed to be budget friendly, get the cheapest eggs you can find. They're still going to be better. Get ground beef. Get only buy whole chicken. Don't buy individual parts. Buy the whole chicken because one, it's just gonna be cheaper. You've got to do the work yourself, or just cook the chicken whole, and then use that carcass to make your own broth for your own soups and
mhm,
things like that. Get double use out of it, right? You can, use rice and beans as fillers. It's going to be better. Get them dry. Cook them yourself. Buy frozen veggies only. You can, if you're on WIC or you're on food stamps, a lot of farmers markets now are matching up to $20. So if you go and you go to a vendor, they've got usually like a food stamp or WIC table set up, and you're like, hey, here's, you're basically, they're going to take $20 off your card, and they'll actually in return give you 40. Right. Most of them are
mhm.
matching either 10 or 20. And you can do that every week. It's not like once a month. You could do that each week that they'll match. So these are all ways to be able to stretch that dollar a bit and go and, be picky, don't go and get the most expensive thing at the farmer's market just because you got some extra money, but it can stretch that. And so, we're getting these cheap food. It doesn't have to be luxurious. Eat organ meats, right? Like
Yeah.
organ
Organ
meats are
meats are
cheap
cheap.
cut. Organ
Yeah.
meats and roasts, a lot of the fatty cuts are cheaper. right? The roast and getting organs, getting ground.
You can find liver at something like 50 cents a pound at Walmart, and
Yeah.
tongue. I just did tacos de lengua,
Oh, tongue is the best, man.
oh yeah, and I mean, it takes a little work to process it. You know, you got to slow cook it for a while and then cut that outer skin off. But I mean, it's not too hard, and you could prep a lot of this stuff and have it on side, and then fry it up in the pan to crisp it up a little bit if you want to. Um, there's people that have done great job on their diets getting the rotisserie chicken. You know, from
Mhm.
some places there you can actually get the
You can
kind
get
that's
them
not doesn't have
cheap.
sugar in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you could turn that into bone broth, and you didn't even have
Yep.
to cook it in the first place. But
At Whole Foods, it's cheaper to buy the rotisserie chicken at Whole Foods than it is the raw whole chicken. And these
that's
grocery stores
crazy.
do that because they're okay losing. They're not going to lose money. They're just not going to make money on it. And their
Mhm.
goal is to get you in the door for that rotisserie chicken because they know if you come in the door to get the rotisserie, you're going to buy other things,
Right.
right? And so that's where they're going to make their money. It's just like you go to a website and there's like, here's my my free guide, and now you're on my email list, and I'm going to send you things. It's the same thing.
Now, considering how much money we spend on the treatment of mental health care, on the treatment of digestive issues as a national GDP in culture in communities and um, throughout the U.S. And as far as a country goes, the money that we spend on antidepressants, on ADD meds, on all this. I mean, this is a massive amount of our GDP is now going into these illness care
Yeah.
and not health care. And just let's go into theory realm right now. How much money, how much more prosperous do you think we would be as people, as communities, and as a country if we were not having to spend this much money on sick care? And
I
we
mean,
could,
just think of the brain fog that the amount of Americans are walking around with brain fog. You may not even realize it, or the amount of sick days they have because of these issues. I mean, I was missing work because of my digestive issues. How many other people are doing that? How many women are, having to not they're not able to go into work because their PMS is so bad. PMS is not a normal thing. That would be a horrific design of the human species if you were actually out of commission for 5 days, 4 to 5 days every month. Like that would be a horrible, we would not have survived as a species. But it's so common that we just think it's normal. I mean, there's like whole like TV segments and movie segments about it and jokes and on and on and on. And
mm,
it's not how women shouldn't have to deal with that. But because of our diet, because of our lifestyle, it's become the norm. Um, Goodness, how much more prosperous and profitable we could be. You can't even begin to put that number on. If we didn't miss all the work, if our brain could function better, we could think clearer. And I've looked at 3 studies this year at least that have looked at the gut microbiome's impact on Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Some of these coming up to be one of the biggest concerns for aging adults, even over cancer, is Alzheimer's and dementia and cognitive decline. And looking at the impact of the microbiome and essentially diet and digestion, its impact on your risk for these. And it's becoming a new area. And our only hope for Alzheimer's and dementia and cognitive decline is prevention. The most pharmaceutical companies have actually abandoned their drug studies on Alzheimer's and dementia because they have been that bad at getting any progress.
they've had better results with using certain mushrooms. Not even the but even low dose psilocybin mushrooms and things like that. But things like reishi and cordyceps and lion's mane and things like that, they've had better results with that than they have with a lot of the drugs.
Yep. Yeah.
So the we're going to be coming up on time, and it was really awesome to have. Normally, as you know, I usually ask 5 questions, and when you started out, I didn't have my 5 questions kind of dialed in. I did ask you some, but now I got a standard thing going. So as I'm learning how to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
So my standard questions now, and I do believe I asked you some of them, but my first one is, and I did ask you, is the top 5 health heroes, and we got that covered. So I'm going to go into what 3 foods should you eat for digestion health?
Ooh. Seafood
Mm,
as a whole, omega-3 rich seafood as a whole. Omega-3s are amazing for digestive health. Um, Fermented veggies and oh man, let's go with probably leafy greens. There's probably going to be the three kind of I would say it'd be hard to pick individual foods. Let's go with categories there. I think that is going to do a lot. Omega-3s just support a ton. Fermented veggies are going. You can get there's that hits a huge one. So you could ferment all sorts of different veggies. So I think that's kind of cheating that way, but we'll
yeah.
go with that. Fermented foods in general are going to be super supportive.
I like categories because it gives you a broader spectrum of things.
Yeah,
You may not, if you mention something specific, then a person may not be able to find it. Like if you say beet kvass, and they're like,
yeah,
well, where do I find beet kvass?
yeah.
And
Or what can I substitute that? Yes, you can
yeah,
substitute that. Yeah,
yeah.
let's
So
go broad here, and anyone
yeah,
can fit into those
so
categories.
yeah, I like that. So my next question will be, what are 3 foods that are the most horrible for digestive health?
Well, that's easy. Gluten, processed seed oils, and sugar. In that order, sugar is not the top, and people especially because again, I spent a lot of time in the keto
Mm.
community, and people want to fight me on that. Sugar is not the number, and it's a toss up between gluten and processed industrial oils as to who might be number one. They might be tied, but those are going to be the 2 big ones, and then sugar being the third one. Those 3 are just going to wreak havoc on your digestion.
What is I'm trying to figure out how to word this real quick. I had it in my brain for just a second. And um, what is a major digestive health myth that you would like to go away overnight?
Oh man, that you must eat fiber from real whole grains.
Mm, actually, that seems to cause a lot more problems with a lot of people than it does. Yeah. So, um, and my last one is if you were to change our societal views on a how we treat gut health, what would that be?
That any digestive symptoms that happen probably more than once a month, like if you get bloat once a month or a little bit, like it could just be maybe you're stressed out. But if you have any sort of digestive symptom that happens at any level of regularity, you need to work on it. It is not normal. Again, going back to the common and normal thing, it is incredibly common to have gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, foul smelling gas, and heartburn, reflux, burping. Any of those things are so common that we think they're normal, and they're not. If you have those things, reach out, let's chat. I'd love to help you get rid of those things.
Now, the last time I had you on the show, you were working with Destination Health, but you have ventured on to a new workplace now that you're experimenting. We're not experimenting, but you're broadening your career horizons with
I,
something a little bit new. So tell us what you're doing, where to find you, what's going on now.
Yeah, there's no experimenting. It is all in. The
Yeah.
parachute is hopefully beginning to open, but I am off the cliff. There's no rope tied up there to keep me up. I am off, but I am completely on my own now. So I'm just running my own practice. So you can, we'll get the links because people are going to spell it wrong probably, but fundamentawellness.com. It is. Everyone's like, did you forget the L? Is it supposed to be fundamental? No, it's just the Latin version. Because something like fundamental wellness at this point in the game has been taken. So we got creative. I used the Latin root there. So it's Fundamenta Wellness. You can find me on Instagram that way. You can just find me on Facebook by my name. We can definitely get any links down below. Fundamental Wellness at Gmail if you need to email me. But yeah, so I do my own practice. It's kind of a twofold thing. I do one-on-one nutritional therapy with anyone dealing with things from diabetes to metabolic syndrome, digestive issues, thyroid issues, PCOS. A lot of the major problems that we're seeing right now. I've worked with hundreds of people in my practice at this point, so I have a lot of experience in a lot of these major issues. I love getting in and working with you both on lifestyle and diet to help fix those issues, especially digestion. Obviously, it's something I'm very passionate about. But I also do mentoring for practitioners. So if you are a nutritional therapy practitioner or a health coach and you're struggling to get started from actually working with clients, I'm not a marketing coach. I'm not going to teach you how to get 1,000, 20,000, people on your Instagram, next week, or to build your email list to 50,000 or whatever. That's not what I focus on. I focus on how to actually be a practitioner. So it doesn't matter how many people you get on that email list. If you can actually help people, it's not going to matter. I want to help you actually help people. So that's what I do. So if that's something you're interested, again, you can find me at all the same places, and let's chat.
Awesome, man. And this has been the Fatty Joe Show. We are a listener supported podcast. So if you want to support us, you can go over to carrybrown.com, check out our cookbooks, the master classes. You could also become a Patreon by going to patreon.com/ or patreon.com/ The Fatty Joe Show, or patreon.com/ Carrie Brown. Now, there is also, you can share this episode or any of our other episodes. You leave a comment or a review down below. That helps us get out to more people, see more people. And you could also watch us on YouTube, which helps bring in some revenue. It helps keep the doors open. One other thing that you can do is, if you want to check out our Zazzle store, it's down below. If you want to sport a nice, nifty Fatty Joe shirt or get a coffee mug or something like that, you could definitely do that. And I do want to give a shout out to Sarah Christensen and Sherry Nauer, who are rock star patrons of the show, and they've been supporting us for even before the show existed. And I want to say thank you very much to you guys. All right, everybody, have a great day, and we will see you on the next episode. And Michael is definitely probably coming back again, so we'll
Anytime.
have him back. All right, man. So
thank you for joining us on the Fatty Joe Show. Be sure to leave a comment and subscribe. It helps the show reach more people. To support the show, as well as Carrie Brown and Yogi's work on the blog, keto recipe development, masterclasses, and to gain access to private Facebook groups and other awards, go to patreon.com/The Fatty Joe Show or patreon.com/Carrie Brown. Also, check out our Carrie Brown and Yogi Parker YouTube channel for video versions of The Fatty Joe Show, recipe videos, and more. Join our awesome community on the Facebook group, The Keto Kitchen with Carrie Brown and Yogi Parker, and check out our carriebrown.com website for recipes, blog posts, discounts, cookbooks, masterclasses, and other great stuff. Thank you so much.